The most enigmatic CEO in Austin had just fired another assistant, the third in 2 months. Employees at Innovatech whispered in the hallways that he simply couldn't stand having women around. "He's gay for sure," they'd say under their breath. "See how he pulls away if one gets too close?" The man is terrified of physical contact with any woman. And it really seemed to be true. Julian Blackwood, at 32, had never been seen with a girlfriend. At company parties, he avoided even shaking female employees' hands. He maintained a safe distance from any feminine presence. And when a secretary dared to get too close, he would literally recoil as if facing imminent danger. But no one knew the truth he was hiding. No one knew about the trauma that haunted him like an invisible shadow. Innovatech, his company specializing in tech accessories and software development, was the largest in Central Texas. With annual revenue exceeding $10 million, Julian had built an empire based on innovation and obsessive perfectionism. Ultra-durable tablets, smart smartphone cases, next-generation wireless chargers. Everything left his factories with the mark of excellence. But his personal life was a mystery that fueled endless gossip, each rumor more cruel than the last. On that Tuesday morning, Julian walked into the conference room with firm steps, but his face twisted in annoyance when he saw an abandoned coffee mug on the table. A dark stain marred the quarterly financial report, the one he was to present to Japanese investors on Friday. His slender fingers clenched against the polished wood of the table. He detested disorder, dirt, anything out of place. "Housekeeping," his voice echoed through the intercom, clipped as always. "Conference room, now." Chloe Garcia arrived in 10 minutes, nervously rubbing her hands on her blue company apron. At 28, she had already been through 13 different jobs, all in maintenance services. She knew she couldn't afford to lose this one, especially since she supported her diabetic mother and was still paying off the mortgage on her modest house in East Austin. Every late bill was an anguish that kept her awake at night. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood," she murmured, avoiding his direct gaze. The night shift must have forgotten to clear it. Silence. He cut the air with a sharp gesture, his intense blue eyes studying her as if she were a complex mathematical equation. She was different from the other cleaning staff. Brown curly hair escaped from a ponytail held by a simple elastic band. Her sun-kissed skin glowed softly under the office's artificial light, and a subtle scent of cinnamon contrasted with the antiseptic environment. There was something genuine about her that intrigued him, but also deeply unsettled him. A naturalness he had lost long ago, perhaps forever. Chloe carefully moved forward to pick up the mug, but the worn heel of her shoe, the same pair she'd worn for 2 years, slipped on the waxed floor. She tried to steady herself, her arms flailing for support, but gravity was stronger. Her heart pounded. Not now, not like this. Julian saw it all in slow motion. Her body spinning toward his chair, her brown eyes wide with surprise, her arms flailing. And then it happened. Her hip collided directly with his leg, and suddenly, Chloe Garcia was sitting on the lap of the wealthiest and most mysterious man in the city. Time stood still. Julian felt something inside him break, but not in the way he expected. His muscles tensed, yes, but not with the usual revulsion he felt when a woman accidentally touched him. It was warmth. An electric shock surged up from where her soft thigh pressed against his, where the scent of cinnamon invaded his senses, where the heat of a woman's body awakened something he thought was dead forever. For the first time in 3 long years, since his condition had developed, he didn't have a panic attack. He didn't feel the tightness in his chest, the shortness of breath, the cold sweat that always came when a woman got too close. Instead, he felt desire, pure, searing, and completely unexpected. His body was reacting in a way it hadn't for so long he had almost forgotten what it felt like. Chloe immediately noticed the growing bulge beneath her and jumped up as if she were on fire. "Oh my God, I am so sorry." Her brown eyes widened even more. "I swear it wasn't on purpose." She had just sat on the lap of the man who, according to all company rumors, was gay and loved to fire women at the first opportunity. The man who never touched anyone, who avoided even shaking women's hands in meetings. Julian stood up abruptly, adjusting his Italian suit jacket with jerky, uncontrolled movements. His mind was in chaos, trying to process what had just happened. How was this possible? How had his body reacted this way after protecting itself for so long? In the halls of Innovatech, the whispers were constant. He's gay for sure. He never touches anyone. He's disgusted by women. My cousin worked at a company he did a deal with and said the guy won't even greet the female executives. But here, in this conference room, an undeniable truth pulsed in the rarefied air. He was aroused. Genuinely, physically aroused after a very, very long time. Julian pursed his lips, still feeling the phantom echo of Chloe's warmth on his leg. His body's reaction was unprecedented, disturbing, and at the same time, strangely liberating, as if a hibernating part of him had suddenly awakened. It was terrifying and wonderful, all at once. "Leave," he ordered, but his voice came out huskier and more tremulous than he intended. Chloe backed away until she hit the glass wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I swear to God it was an accident, Mr. Blackwood. You can dock my pay. Transfer me to another department, please. Leave. Now." His voice was almost unrecognizable, heavy with an urgency she couldn't interpret. She hesitated for a moment. There was something very strange in the way he acted. It wasn't anger, it wasn't disgust. It was something that felt like a mix of panic and curiosity, as if she were a puzzle he desperately needed to solve, as if she had triggered something inside him that had been dormant for years. "Didn't you hear me?" He turned his back sharply, his shoulders tense beneath the impeccable suit. When the door closed with a soft click, Julian let out a shaky breath he had been holding. He placed his trembling hands on the table, trying to control his irregular breathing. That simple, accidental contact had triggered a reaction that 3 years of intensive therapy, 2 different psychiatrists, and an obscene amount of antidepressants had failed to produce. His body had responded. It had desired. It had felt pleasure from a woman's touch for the first time since everything had fallen apart. Since Victoria. Since the nightmare that had nearly destroyed him completely. Across the hall, Chloe pressed a hand to her chest, still feeling her racing heart. She leaned against the cold wall, trying to process what had just happened. "He's not gay," she murmured to herself, the revelation hitting her like a lightning bolt. The discovery sent an electric shock down her spine. The panic in his blue eyes had been authentic, but it definitely wasn't revulsion or disgust. It was something far more complex and unsettling. It was pure, frightening desire, as if he himself didn't know how to handle his own reaction. As if he were discovering something about himself after years of denial. And there was something else that intrigued her. For a few seconds, before the shock took over, she had felt that he didn't want her to get off him. She had noticed how the muscles in his legs had tensed, not to push her away, but as if trying to memorize the sensation. As if that moment were too precious to be wasted. Meanwhile, Julian had locked himself in the executive bathroom of his office, cold water running over his pale face. But the image of Chloe stubbornly returned with full force. The dark curls escaping her simple ponytail, the delicate curve of her neck as she bent to pick up the mug, the soft warmth of her body against his. The feeling of being alive again after so long of being dead inside. After 3 years of being unable to touch a woman without having a severe anxiety attack, Julian knew one thing for certain. He desperately wanted to feel that again, and that scared him more than any panic attack ever had. The harsh fluorescent light of the office illuminated the personnel files scattered across the mahogany desk. Chloe Garcia, 28, high school diploma from Eastwood High, 13 previous jobs in cleaning companies. Current salary of $2,100 a month. Julian studied every line of the file as if he were analyzing a multi-million-dollar contract with international investors. Every detail mattered. Every piece of information was a part of the puzzle he needed to assemble. Born and raised in East Austin, daughter of small farmers from the Texas Hill Country who specialized in wildflowers and peaches. Parents still alive, but facing financial difficulties with their small property. Mother diabetic, on disability. A younger sister, Lily Garcia, 25, known for her explosive temper and fierce protection of Chloe. No criminal record, no red flags on her credit report. Professional references were always positive, despite the high turnover in her jobs. Nothing in that report justified the uncontrollable tremor in his hands when he had signed off on her new contract 10 minutes earlier. It was as if he were about to make the most important decision of his life. And perhaps he was. He watched through the smoked glass of his office as she fidgeted nervously in the hallway. rubbing her arms as if trying to erase some persistent sensation. Julian's knuckles tapped lightly on the glass. Chloe flinched as if she'd received an electric shock and looked directly through the one-way mirror. He knew she couldn't possibly see him, but her brown eyes landed exactly on his position, as if sensing his intense observation. It was impossible, but it happened, as if there were an invisible connection between them. "Come in." His voice came through the intercom, slightly distorted by the electronic system. Chloe entered as if treading on a minefield, clutching the employment contract to her chest like a shield. Her shoes made a soft sound against the Italian marble floor. "Mr. Blackwood, She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I can't even type well on a computer. I only know the basics. Word, simple things." He swiveled his leather chair slowly, like a predator studying its prey. "I didn't hire you to type." She frowned in confusion. "Then for what?" Julian rose with precise movements, approaching with measured, calculated steps. Chloe didn't retreat, but her fingers instinctively tightened on the paper, slightly creasing the edges. 3 steps away, he stopped, close enough to smell that subtle cinnamon scent again, far enough to maintain the control that was hanging by a thread. "You touched me the day before yesterday," he said, his voice lower and more intimate than he intended. Chloe blushed intensely, the color rising from the modest neckline of her blouse to her ears. "It was a terrible accident. I swear on my mother's life." "I know it was." He turned abruptly, walking to the panoramic window that overlooked downtown Austin. "The fact is, I liked the feeling, and I didn't have my usual reaction." The silence hung between them like a thick curtain. Outside, a plane crossed the blue sky, tiny and distant, leaving a white trail that slowly dissipated. The city carried on with its routine, but inside, the world seemed to have stopped. What was the usual reaction? She dared to ask, her voice a mere thread. Julian closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering the courage for a confession he had never made to anyone. The words came slowly, painfully. Severe difficulty breathing, uncontrollable panic attacks, cold sweats, tremors, nausea. There was a long pause. "My body would simply shut down whenever a woman touched me." "That's very serious." Chloe let out a nervous laugh before quickly covering her mouth with her hands. "Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh. Do you have some specific trauma with women?" The corners of Julian's mouth twitched almost imperceptibly. $8,000 a month, he said abruptly, changing the subject. "Flexible hours. You will do exactly what I need when I need it." Her eyes widened like saucers. "That's more than 4 times what I made in housekeeping." "You are the first woman to touch me in 3 entire years without causing a nervous breakdown." He interrupted her, the confession coming out like a bullet. "I'm sick of the malicious speculation about my sexuality. Your job will simply be to stay by my side as much as possible." She bit her lower lip, thoughtful. The offer was too tempting to be true, but there was something in his eyes that made her believe the desperate sincerity behind the words. "And if I say no?" Julian tilted his head slightly. "Then you go back to the housekeeping department tomorrow morning, as if this conversation never happened. Across town, in the elegant house in the Westlake Hills neighborhood, Eleanor Blackwood stirred the sugar in her afternoon coffee with more force than necessary. The spoon clinked against the fine china in a nervous, repetitive beat. "My son hired a janitor as his personal assistant," she grumbled to her husband, who was reading the paper in the armchair beside her. "Some clever gold digger must have gotten her claws into him." "Eleanor, Julian is a grown, intelligent man." Henry tried to soothe her, lowering his newspaper. "Grown and vulnerable. After what that viper Victoria did to him, any calculating woman could take advantage of my boy's emotional fragility." Her eyes shone with fierce maternal suspicion. "I need to meet this Chloe in person to investigate her intentions." Back at the Innovatech office, Chloe looked back and forth between her own calloused hands and his, manicured and smooth. "I accept," she said finally, lifting her chin in a gesture of determination. "But with one non-negotiable condition." He arched an eyebrow, intrigued. "You can never, ever fall in love with me." Julian laughed. Actually laughed. A deep, genuine sound that echoed through the room, breaking the tension that hung in the air. "That will never happen," he murmured, extending his right hand for the shake that would seal the deal. At the last second, however, his fingers instinctively pulled back. The old fear was still there, deep down, hovering like a persistent ghost between them. 3 years of conditioning didn't vanish with a single moment of clarity. but Chloe smiled with motherly patience as if she understood perfectly. There was something in his blue eyes that intrigued her deeply, a devastating mix of corporate strength and emotional fragility that awakened a protective instinct in her she didn't even know she possessed. "It's okay," she said softly, lowering her own hand. "We can start slow. No rush." At Innovatech, the news of the unusual hire spread through the floors like wildfire. Richard Olson, Julian's minority partner and secretly his greatest business rival, couldn't hide the malicious smile forming on his thin lips. "An interesting choice from our CEO," he commented casually to Jessica Moss, who had been Chloe's colleague in housekeeping. "A janitor as an executive assistant. Julian must be really desperate to keep up heterosexual appearances." Jessica, consumed by an envy that grew like a weed in her chest, eagerly agreed. "She's always been calculating, Mr. Olson. Ever since we worked together, I could tell Chloe had an agenda." Richard was already meticulously planning how to use this information to his advantage. For 8 months, he had been silently orchestrating a coup to take controlling interest in the company. And now he had the perfect pretext in the palm of his hand, the CEO's emotional instability and irrational decisions. It was only a matter of time before he could use it against Julian. Meanwhile, in his penthouse apartment with a panoramic view of all of Austin, Julian poured himself a generous glass of 18-year-old scotch, trying to mentally process everything that had happened in that surreal day. For the first time in 3 long years, he felt almost normal, as if a fundamental part of himself that had been dead and buried had suddenly awakened from an emotional coma. Chloe Garcia. The name echoed in his mind like a strange but not unpleasant song. There was something about her that intrigued him beyond the obvious physical attraction. A naturalness, a spontaneity that he had completely lost after everything he had been through. A light he thought he would never find again. Maybe, he thought before falling asleep that night, watching the city lights through his bedroom window, maybe she could be much more than just a temporary solution to my psychological problems. Maybe she's exactly what I need to become human again. To feel alive after so long of just surviving. A week later, the entire Innovatech office froze as if time had stopped when Chloe placed her hand on Julian's back during a board meeting. She hadn't thought twice. She was tired of seeing him act like a programmed robot in meetings, tense and distant from all the employees, as if he were constantly fighting invisible ghosts. As he walked past her in the spacious conference room, heading to grab some papers he'd forgotten, she simply reached out and rested her palm gently between his shoulder blades, as if it were the most natural gesture in the world. "You forgot this," she said in a soft voice, holding up the Mont Blanc pen he had dropped on the floor without noticing. The silence was instant and deafening. The 8 executives present at the meeting froze completely, eyes wide, jaws slightly agape, as if they had witnessed a biblical miracle or a heinous crime. Julian stood absolutely still, muscles as taut as violin strings under his impeccable Italian suit. Every person in that room knew of his pathological aversion to female physical contact. It was the stuff of company legend. Stories circulated about how he once refused a business award because he would have had to accept it from the hands of a female executive. But there he was, letting a woman's hand rest calmly on his back for 5 whole seconds. He turned slowly, as if every movement were calculated. He took the pen with fingers that trembled almost imperceptibly and murmured a thank you, so quiet that only she could hear it. But his eyes, his blue eyes, shone with something no one else in the room could perceive. Something that looked like a mixture of gratitude, surprise, and a warmth he thought he had lost forever. The whispers started before she even left the conference room. "Did you see that?" He let her touch him. "Impossible. Julian is terrified of physical contact with women. My God, maybe he's getting better. Maybe she really is special." Richard Olson watched the entire scene from his office through the glass walls, his jaw clenched in a hard line of displeasure. This woman was definitely ruining his carefully laid plans. He needed to act faster than he had planned. Much faster. 3 days later, on a rainy late afternoon, Chloe received a direct call from Julian. His voice sounded strangely formal, almost distant. "I need you to come in earlier tomorrow at 5:30 in the morning." She agreed without question, but the next day, when he arrived promptly at 6, she had already been there for half an hour. Dark circles marked her face, and the coffee she had brewed was so strong you could smell the intense aroma from meters away. What time exactly did you wake up? He asked, watching her try to discreetly hide a yawn behind her mug. She rubbed her red eyes. The early bus is always unpredictable when you live on the east side. I left home at 3:30 to be safe. No. The word came out firmer than he intended. This isn't working. He carefully avoided her gaze, needlessly shuffling papers on his desk. You'll spend the rest of the week at my apartment. Chloe almost spat out her coffee. Excuse me? Guest room, he clarified quickly, the words rushing out. We arrive together. We leave together. Pure work efficiency. Efficiency? She crossed her arms, a teasing smile on her lips. Is that all? He finally looked at her directly. There was something strange and vulnerable in his blue eyes. Exactly that. He lied through his teeth. Chloe knew perfectly well it was a lie, but she accepted anyway. There was something in the way he looked at her that made her heart race in a completely inconvenient way, as if she were important to him in a way that went far beyond work or therapy. His apartment was literally another world. A duplex penthouse in the most luxurious building in Westlake Hills, with a 180-degree panoramic view of all of Austin. Italian designer furniture, fine art on the walls, a kitchen equipped like a professional restaurant. Chloe had never been in such a sophisticated place in her entire life. It was like stepping into one of those home design shows on TV. The building's gym opens at 5 a.m., Julian said, appearing at the guest room door with a sports towel over his shoulder. Without the formal business suit, wearing just a cotton t-shirt and running shorts, he looked younger, more approachable, more human. The condominium gym was as intimidating as an Olympic training center. Chloe felt like a fish completely out of water, especially when Julian started adjusting the machines and explaining the exercises with the same seriousness and precision as a board meeting with Japanese investors. This is the bench press. He pointed to the padded bench. 3 sets of 12 reps each. I know perfectly well what a bench press is, she grumbled with fake annoyance. But when she tried to lift the bar, the weight was absolutely impossible for her untrained arms. Julian didn't laugh or show any condescension. He simply adjusted the weights with a precise, professional movement. Try again, with less weight now. On her 4th frustrated attempt, he finally sighed and positioned himself behind her, his hands hovering carefully near the bar. I'll spot you for safety. You just lift. Chloe felt the warmth of his body radiating onto her back, his controlled breathing near her neck. She focused so much on the distracting proximity that this time she managed to complete the entire set. Each repetition was a small but significant victory. The leg press was an even more embarrassing experience. Chloe placed her feet in the completely wrong position on the platform, and when she tried to push the weight, her knees almost buckled dangerously to the side. Julian acted with quick reflexes, firmly grabbing her legs and guiding them to the correct anatomical position. His fingers were surprisingly warm and steady against her skin. For an eternal second, he didn't immediately remove his hands. He just remained there, deliberately touching her, as if carefully testing his own limits and reactions. Then, as if he'd suddenly been burned, he snatched his hands back. Sorry. For what? She frowned, genuinely confused. You just helped me not get hurt. He didn't respond verbally, but Chloe watched closely as he looked at his own hands afterward, as if he couldn't quite believe what he had just voluntarily done. As if touching someone without panicking was a miracle he was still processing. On the treadmill, Chloe decided to impress him and show she wasn't completely sedentary. She increased the speed far beyond her capabilities. Her foot slipped on the moving surface, and suddenly, she was falling dangerously backward. Julian reacted with impressive reflexes before she could hit the ground hard. His arms wrapped around her tightly, pulling her firmly against his chest, saving her from a fall that could have caused serious injury. For an instant that felt like an eternity, they stood exactly in that position. Chloe could feel his heart beating rapidly against her back. His muscles were tense, but he didn't let her go immediately. It was as if a part of him never wanted to let her go. Are you okay? He asked, his voice softer and more concerned than she had ever heard it. She turned slowly in his arms. Their faces were dangerously close, their breaths mingling. I'm okay now, she murmured. He released her then, but not before Chloe clearly felt his fingers tighten slightly on her arms, as if a part of him didn't really want to let her go, as if that moment was too precious to end. That night, in the cozy silence of the apartment, two people called Chloe almost simultaneously. First was Maya Cruz, her best friend since high school. "You've literally fallen off the map, Chloe. What on earth is going on in your life?" "I'm temporarily staying with my boss," Chloe confessed, trying to sound casual. Before Maya could respond, the doorbell rang. It was Lily Garcia, her younger sister, with her dark hair cut in a rebellious bob and a suspicious look in her eyes. "Lily, how did you find out where I was?" "I did some digging." She walked in without ceremony, examining every detail of the luxurious apartment. "Since when do you live in a palace, big sis?" Chloe sighed. She knew that tone. Lily had a gift for being both protective and meddlesome at the same time. "It's temporary, just to make work easier." "Work?" Lily arched an eyebrow. "Since when do housekeepers live with their boss? Isn't this guy that mysterious gay CEO everyone talks about?" "He's not gay, Lily." "Oh, of course not," she said with sarcasm. "And I'm the Queen of England. You're being so naive. Rich men always have an agenda. You don't know him. And you do?" Lily crossed her arms. "Tell me something. Have you two kissed?" Chloe's silence was answer enough. "I didn't think so." Lily sighed. "Listen, sis, I don't trust this guy. Something tells me he's hiding something serious." While this conversation was happening, on the other side of town, in the mirrored commercial building of Innovatech, Richard Olson was working late, meticulously plotting his next move. If he couldn't separate Julian from this woman through subtle methods, he wouldn't hesitate to use more direct and aggressive tactics. Lily decided she needed to get to know this Julian Blackwood better. The next day, she showed up at Innovatech, posing as a potential supplier of ornamental plants. She managed to get a 15-minute meeting with the CEO. "Mr. Blackwood," she introduced herself with false cordiality. "I represent Flora Garcia, specializing in corporate landscaping." Julian received her politely, but Lily immediately noticed how he avoided any physical contact, how he kept a safe distance from her. "Your company has excellent references," she lied, watching his every reaction. "By any chance do you know my sister, Chloe Garcia?" "She works here in housekeeping." Julian's face changed subtly. "I do. She's a competent employee." "That's good to hear." Lily smiled, but her eyes remained calculating. "She told me you promoted her recently. You must trust her a lot." "I do," he replied, but there was something in his voice that Lily couldn't decipher. Leaving the meeting, she had more questions than answers. There was something strange about that man, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly what. It wasn't malice, it wasn't financial interest. It was vulnerability. And that scared her even more because it meant her sister could get seriously hurt. The war was just beginning, and now there was a new piece on the board, a suspicious and overprotective sister. The apartment was steeped in a cozy silence when they returned from the gym. Chloe collapsed onto the Italian leather sofa, her legs still visibly trembling from the intense workout, while Julian went straight to the open-plan kitchen for cold water. She watched, fascinated as he drank, his throat working hypnotically, the muscles in his forearm flexing under the soft light of the recessed spotlights. There was something genuinely captivating about this man when he finally let down all his carefully constructed guards. "Julian," he stopped drinking immediately, bottle still in hand. "Why did you apologize earlier at the gym?" The air in the room grew noticeably heavy. He placed the bottle on the granite countertop with excessive, unnecessary care, as if he needed precious time to choose every word that would come out of his mouth. "You wouldn't be able to fully understand. Tell me, I really want to help you somehow." Julian took a deep breath, his blue eyes fixed on the panoramic window, where the city of Austin glittered intensely below, as if the lights could give him the courage for the confession that was to come. "Exactly 5 years ago," he began, his voice completely flat and controlled, as if he were reading a technical report to investors, "I became romantically involved with a colleague, Victoria Vance, the company's marketing director at the time." Chloe remained completely still, barely daring to breathe. At first, it was just something casual, no strings attached. We'd go out for dinner, movies, a few weekends together. Nothing too serious. He closed his eyes briefly. After 3 months, she started saying I was the great love of her life, that she couldn't live without me, that we were soulmates destined to be together forever. The knot in Chloe's stomach began to tighten uncomfortably. When I finally tried to end the relationship because I realized I didn't feel the same, she literally started stalking me, obsessively. She'd send over 100 texts a day, show up at my building at dawn, at the office, at the gym. She would cry hysterically, scream in front of everyone, say she would kill herself if I left her. Julian opened his eyes and looked directly at Chloe. I got back together with her out of pure pity, out of guilt, out of fear that she would actually do something crazy to herself. And then, Chloe asked softly, already suspecting the worst was yet to come. 6 months later, when she finally had me completely controlled and submissive, he laughed, but it was a sound completely devoid of humor. I discovered by chance that she had been blatantly cheating on me for months with my own partner, Richard Olson. Julian's fingers tightened involuntarily. When I confronted her with the evidence, when I showed her the photos, the messages, she completely flipped the script. She publicly accused me of sexual and psychological harassment. She told anyone who would listen that I physically and mentally abused her, that I forced her to stay with me against her will, that I used my economic power to blackmail her. Chloe felt the blood run cold in her veins. She threatened to file a multi-million-dollar criminal and labor lawsuit to completely destroy my professional and personal reputation. She even gave interviews to local newspapers inventing stories about my behavior. His voice grew even lower. I paid her an astronomical fortune to shut her up for good and disappear from my life. And it was after that you developed the panic reactions with women? Yes, he stared at his own hands. My body started to go into total collapse whenever a woman touched me, as if it were automatically defending itself before I could be falsely accused of something again. Chloe slowly rose from the sofa, approaching him with careful movements. And with me, Julian, how do you feel with me? He looked into her eyes, and there was something devastatingly vulnerable in his expression. With you, my body just completely forgot to be afraid. She stopped exactly 1 step away. Do you still take antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, things like that? I've been on a combination of medications for 3 years, but they don't have much of a practical effect. Chloe didn't touch him immediately. Instead, she carefully sat on the counter next to him, their knees almost touching, invading his personal space without being invasive. I'm not her, Julian. I know that perfectly well. How about we run a scientific test? She said, her brown eyes shining with a calculated mix of challenge and tender care. He arched an eyebrow, intrigued despite his obvious nervousness. What kind of test? I'm going to touch you, gradually and in a controlled way. She raised her hands, letting them hover in the air, and you will tell me exactly when you want me to stop. No pressure. No rush. Julian swallowed hard visibly. His muscles tensed like guitar strings, but he nodded in silent confirmation. Chloe began extremely slowly and delicately. First, just the tips of her fingers on his chest, right over his rapidly beating heart. He instinctively held his breath but didn't move a millimeter. Okay so far? She asked, her voice as soft as silk. He nodded, his blue eyes intensely fixed on hers. She calmly slid her hands to his broad shoulders, feeling the muscle tension under the thin cotton shirt, then down his back, firm but gentle, as if trying to physically remind him that this touch was real, safe, well-intentioned. Are you managing to breathe normally? She teased gently, feeling his muscles gradually relax. I'm trying with all my might. His voice came out hoarse and vulnerable. Chloe smiled encouragingly and then raised her hands to his face. Her palms caressed his temples with infinite gentleness, her thumbs carefully tracing the strong line of his jaw. He closed his eyes, concentrating completely on every minute point of contact. When he finally opened his eyes again, what she saw in them made her own heart accelerate dangerously. There was no fear, no panic, no tension, only pure warmth, only genuine and overwhelming desire. You've literally become the cure I was so desperately looking for, he confessed, his voice coming out like an intimate whisper. I really like you. Julian, Chloe let slip, unable to stop herself. I honestly don't think I know how to do this right anymore, he admitted with brutal honesty. I don't know how to be someone you truly deserve. Chloe couldn't resist for another second. She gently pulled his head down and kissed him. It was like awakening something that had been dormant for years. Julian responded to the kiss with a desperate urgency that completely surprised her. His hands found her waist, pulling her closer, as if she might disappear at any moment. When they finally broke apart, both were completely breathless, their lips still dangerously close. I think the scientific test was an absolute success, she murmured, laughing softly. Julian didn't laugh. Instead, he rested his forehead against hers gently, eyes closed, as if trying to burn this moment into his memory forever. I really like you too, Chloe. 3 simple words, but truer than ever. I like you too. She smiled and kissed him again, more slowly this time. Now take me to your bed before I come up with an even bolder test. He laughed then, a hoarse, genuine sound, and lifted her into his arms without ceremony. For the first time in 3 long years, Julian Blackwood forgot about medication, therapy, or a painful past. He only thought of her, only felt her, only wanted her. Meanwhile, across the city, 2 different people were actively plotting against them. Richard Olson was meeting discreetly with Eleanor Blackwood at an elegant downtown cafe. Your motherly concern is completely valid, Eleanor, he said with false sincerity. This woman could very well be taking advantage of Julian's emotional fragility. I knew there was something wrong. Eleanor slapped her gloved hand on the table. A janitor doesn't become an executive assistant overnight without having an agenda. I must protect my son from this adventuress. Leave everything to me. Richard smiled with poorly disguised malice. I have a foolproof plan to open his eyes. In the mirrored Innovatech building, Jessica Moss, Chloe's former cleaning colleague, couldn't hide the corrosive envy that consumed her. Seeing her ex-coworker transformed into an executive assistant, living in the boss's apartment, ate at her like acid. She was always calculating and opportunistic, she whispered venomously to any employee who would listen to her malicious gossip. Ever since we worked together, I could tell Chloe had a plan to climb the ladder at others' expense. The enemies were organizing methodically, but Chloe and Julian, now finally united by something stronger than fear, were about to discover that together they were infinitely more powerful than any of them could imagine separately. The ballroom of the Grand Austin Hotel glittered with low lights and the constant clinking of baccarat crystal glasses. It was the official launch of Innovatech's newest revolutionary product, a wireless charger that worked even through thick surfaces. And absolutely, all of the region's business elite were present for the event. Chloe and Julian were seated comfortably at the main head table, talking in low voices and laughing like 2 teenagers completely in love for the first time. She wore a navy blue silk dress that Julian had insisted on buying at a very expensive boutique at the Domain. And for the first time in many years, he looked genuinely relaxed and happy in public. It was exactly when a couple slyly approached and took the empty seats beside them that everything changed. Julian literally froze in place. Chloe immediately and with crystal clarity noticed the way his fingers involuntarily tightened around his champagne flute. His breathing became visibly shorter and more controlled. She looked carefully at the couple who had sat down. A man in a very expensive Italian suit with a smile as sharp as a blade, and a blonde woman in a tight red dress who could barely hide her shock and spite at seeing Julian with a date. Julian, my dear, the woman said in a syrupy voice, her painted lips curving into a smile that definitely didn't reach her cold eyes. It's been so long. He didn't answer a single word, just shrank slightly, as if the light and energy Chloe knew had been suddenly sucked out and extinguished. Do you know each other? Chloe asked with false innocence, already suspecting exactly who these people were. Ah, so this is the famous new assistant? Victoria laughed with disguised disdain, looking Chloe up and down with a calculatedly critical eye. How interesting. Richard Olson poured himself some red wine, examining the liquid against the candlelight before taking a theatrical sip. Not everyone is born to appreciate a truly fine wine, are they? He commented directly to Chloe, clearly expecting her not to understand the classist jab. Julian clenched his fist so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The muscles in his jaw were visibly tense, pulsing. Chloe saw the subtle tremor in his hands, that same initial tremor that appeared when the old fear began to overcome reason. She acted decisively before he could go into a full-blown panic. She slid her hand over his with firmness and determination, lacing their fingers together possessively and protectively. Victoria nearly choked violently on her wine upon witnessing the intimate gesture. You're right, Chloe said calmly, smiling with venomous sweetness. Not everyone is born to be someone's cure. Some people are born specifically to be the disease. Richard let out a dry, unpleasant laugh. Oh, Julian, so the rumors are true. Are you still desperately trying to pretend you like women? He looked at Chloe with theatrical pity. He's gay, honey. He's just using you as a public front to hide his true sexual orientation. Chloe didn't hesitate for a second. She calmly picked up the glass of red wine and deliberately overturned it onto the man's expensive suit, the dark liquid irreversibly staining the Italian fabric. Oops, she blinked innocently, feigning complete clumsiness. Sorry, but I really don't know how to drink wine properly. Richard leaped from his chair as if he'd been electrocuted, but Chloe was already on her feet, pulling Julian determinedly by the hand. Let's get out of here right now, she said, casting an icy, cutting glance at the couple. Before all this filth contaminates us. Julian offered no resistance. He followed her immediately, but not before casting one last long look at the two of them, a look that communicated without words that he was finally completely free of that past. Richard, his suit completely soaked and ruined, managed to grab Chloe's arm before she could exit the ballroom. You have no idea who you're messing with, you little... He never got to finish the offensive sentence. Julian acted first with reflexes that surprised everyone. Chloe saw something drastically change in his blue eyes, a flash of determination and fury she had never witnessed before. Without any warning or hesitation, Julian took a firm step forward and landed a technically perfect punch on the ex-partner's jaw. The impact was so violent and precise that Richard literally flew backward, knocking over 2 chairs in his path, and collapsed completely unconscious on the marble floor. The entire ballroom froze as if time had stopped. Victoria screamed hysterically. Hotel security rushed toward them, but Julian was already leading Chloe quickly to the exit. No one ever puts a hand on my wife. His voice was firm and controlled, without any trace of the previous tremor. When they finally left the hotel, the night was cool and fragrant, and Julian still held her hand with protective force. You've never hit anyone before in your life, have you? Chloe asked, still half in shock from the sudden violence. He examined his own knuckles as if also mentally processing what he had just done. Never, but it was completely worth it. Then, for the first time that tense evening, he smiled, a wide, genuine, and liberating smile that made Chloe laugh nervously along with him. You were absolutely incredible in there. She shook her head in admiration. I love seeing you defend our honor. I'm learning from the best teacher. He pulled her in for a quick, intense kiss right there on the sidewalk. I love you completely, Chloe. I love you too, Julian. Chloe knew one fundamental thing instinctively. That night had definitely not been about revenge or violence. It had been about definitive healing, about liberation, about finally closing a painful chapter forever. 3 months later, when they were officially living together in the apartment, sharing not only space, but also dreams and future plans, Chloe felt intense butterflies in her stomach as she entered the familiar 42nd floor conference room. The mahogany table was completely covered in fresh red rose petals. Julian stood before the panoramic window, his back to her, hands in his suit pockets. When he turned slowly, his blue eyes were visibly moist with emotion. Do you remember exactly what happened in this room? He asked, his voice softer and more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. Chloe smiled with infinite affection. Of course I do. I clumsily fell into your lap, and you almost had a heart attack. He chuckled softly, but then his expression turned completely serious and solemn. He slowly knelt with elegance on the floor among the fragrant petals and took something small from the inner pocket of his jacket. A simple but absolutely perfect engagement ring. At that moment, I had no idea. He began, swallowing hard, but you were literally saving me from an emotional death. You came into my life like a destructive and reconstructive hurricane, all at once, and managed to fix and heal everything. I had messed up and wounded inside myself. Chloe felt hot tears burn her eyes. Every touch from you was a miraculous medicine. Every laugh from you was a stage of healing. Every day by your side was a step toward the normal life I thought I had lost forever. He held up the ring with slightly trembling hands. I love you more than anything. More than my rules, more than my fears, more than my own life. Chloe Garcia, will you marry me? She couldn't answer with words. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps, dropped to her knees beside him amidst the petals, and kissed him with all the force and passion she had stored in her heart. When they finally broke apart for air, Her tears of happiness had completely wet his face. "So? Is that a yes?" he asked, laughing nervously between the wet kisses. "It's a finally, my love," she replied, cupping his face in her hands. "It's an about time. It's a yes for my whole life." And when he carefully slid the ring onto her ring finger, there was no tremor, no fear, no anxiety. Only pure, true, and eternal love. The big day of the wedding dawned absolutely clear and serene, as if even the sky and all of nature had specially prepared to bless that unique and special moment. The garden of the historic ranch on the outskirts of Austin was decorated with delicacy and sophistication, but with a special touch. The flowers were all from Chloe's parents' property in the hill country. Julian had insisted on it. Maya Cruz, now officially the maid of honor, was helping Chloe with the final details of the delicate French lace veil. "Never in all these years of friendship have I seen you so absolutely radiant, my dear friend." Lily, as a sister and second bridesmaid, adjusted the flowers in the bride's hair. After getting to know Julian better and seeing how he had financially helped their parents, saving the property from bankruptcy, she had completely changed her opinion of him. "I admit I was wrong about your husband," she whispered to Chloe. When he showed up at the ranch with that cultivation revitalization project, Dad cried with emotion. "It's because I finally found my true home," Chloe smiled, observing her own reflection in the antique mirror. On the other side of the property, Robert and Sofia Garcia, Chloe's parents, couldn't hide their pride. The small family farm had been transformed into a prosperous business, thanks to the investment and technical guidance Julian had provided. "I never thought my daughter would marry someone so good," Sophia commented, wiping her eyes. "He didn't just save our land. He saved our Chloe," Robert agreed. Across the ranch, Julian adjusted his silk tie with hands slightly trembling with nervousness and emotion. His father, Henry, patted his son's shoulder affectionately. "I'm tremendously proud of you, my boy. Seeing how you helped our family made me even more certain that you chose the right person." Even Eleanor, who after getting to know Chloe better had humbly admitted she was completely mistaken about her, had confessed to her husband. "She's really different from all the others, Henry. This girl truly loves our son, with sincerity." The traditional bridal march began to play softly. All the guests rose respectfully as Chloe finally appeared at the end of the makeshift aisle between the century-old trees, walking slowly down the white runner toward the rustic altar. Her father, visibly moved to tears, led her with infinite pride toward the man who had become the reason for her happiness. Julian's eyes shone intensely with unshed tears of joy. When she finally reached his side, he murmured softly just for her to hear, "You are absolutely breathtaking." "Are you prepared for this sacred commitment?" the officiant asked with a solemn voice. The marriage vows were spoken with voices thick with emotion, but firm in the conviction of their feelings. Each word echoed not only in the flowered garden, but deep within the heart of every person witnessing that magical moment. Sincere oaths of unconditional love, of mutual support in difficult days, of shared laughter and joined paths forever, no matter what. "I do," said Julian, his voice completely choked with pure emotion. "I do," repeated Chloe, smiling through tears of happiness. "You may now kiss as husband and wife," the officiant announced with satisfaction. The kiss was gentle, filled with promises and hopes. The guests erupted in emotional applause. But for Chloe and Julian, in that perfect instant, only the two of them existed in the entire universe. 8 months after the wedding, wonderful news brought even more vibrant colors to the couple's already completely colorful picture of happiness. Chloe was pregnant. "Are you absolutely sure?" Julian asked, gently holding the pregnancy test with hands visibly trembling with emotion. "Completely and totally sure," she laughed, watching the expression of pure ecstasy spread across her husband's face. He carefully wrapped her in his arms, spinning her around the spacious kitchen of their new home. "I love you so much I can't even express it in words," he murmured against her fragrant hair. "I love you more than anything too," she replied, knowing deep down that she had found not just a great love, but a real home, a real family, a solid and promising future. Innovatic prospered magnificently under its completely renewed management. Richard Olson, after the public scandal at the event, had been definitively removed from the partnership and ousted from the company. Jessica Moss, discovered trying to sabotage important system files, was immediately fired for cause. Julian had created a new division in the company, Innovatic Agro, specializing in technology for small-scale farmers. The first pilot project had been implemented exactly on Chloe's parents' property in the hill country, transforming it into a model farm for smart agriculture. Automated irrigation systems, app-controlled climate-controlled greenhouses, soil moisture sensors connected to the internet, all financed by the company and serving as a laboratory for innovation. The property that had been on the verge of bankruptcy was now one of the most productive in the region. Dad is unrecognizable. He's so proud, Lily would always comment whenever she visited her sister. And Mom can't stop praising her son-in-law. The right people stayed and grew professionally. The wrong people naturally drifted away. And so, from this extraordinary union marked by true love and the overcoming of deep traumas, a beautiful and solid family was born, built on unshakable foundations of faith, renewed hope, and a feeling that could never be called casual or fleeting, because everything, absolutely everything, from the first accidental glance, from that small stumble that changed two lives completely forever, seemed to have been carefully drawn by divine hands much greater than theirs. Chloe Garcia Blackwood, now the Director of Human Resources at Innovistech, looked thoughtfully out the panoramic window of her executive office while tenderly stroking her 7-month belly. Julian entered silently, wrapping his arms around her from behind with infinite affection. "What are you thinking about, love of my life?" he asked softly, kissing her neck. "About how a simple, clumsy stumble changed our entire lives forever." "It was the best stumble of my existence," he laughed, placing his large hands over hers on her rounded belly. "Our daughter is going to be born into a family absolutely full of true love." "How are you so sure it's a girl?" "Pure, loving father's intuition," he smiled. "And she's going to be just as beautiful as her mother." Chloe turned completely in his arms, looking with infinite love at this man whom everyone once mistakenly thought was gay, but who was actually just patiently waiting for the right person to awaken the love that had always existed, dormant inside him. "I love you forever. Julian Blackwood, forever. And a day more," he replied, sealing with a passionate kiss the promise of a lifetime of happiness together. Outside, the city of Austin continued its natural, fast pace, but inside that office, inside that protective embrace, time seemed completely suspended. Lily entered without knocking, as she always did, interrupting the romantic moment. "Sorry for the terrible timing, but you need to see this." She held up a tablet showing a news report. "Forbes wants to do a feature on Innovatech Agro. You've become a national success story." Chloe laughed. "My sister, always as meddlesome as she is protective." "Someone has to look after you two," Lily retorted, but she was smiling affectionately. "By the way, Dad wanted me to tell you that the new greenhouse is already producing double what was expected. He wants to name his first granddaughter Aurora, in honor of the dawn you brought to our family." Julian and Chloe exchanged emotional glances. They had found not just love, but a true family, complete, imperfect, and perfect all at the same time. 5 years later, on a sunny Saturday morning, little Aurora Blackwood ran barefoot through the gardens of the ranch in the hill country, her brown curly hair flying in the wind as she chased butterflies among the flowers. "Daddy! Daddy!" she shouted in a high-pitched child's voice. "Come see what Grandpa Robert taught me." Julian dropped the reports he was reviewing and ran after his daughter, laughing as she pulled him by the hand toward the automated greenhouses. Chloe watched from the porch, one hand resting on the already rounded belly of her second pregnancy. Maya, who had come to spend the weekend with the family, sat down next to her friend. Who would have thought, huh? The girl who cleaned offices now runs the HR department of one of the biggest tech companies in the state. And the traumatized CEO, who no one could touch now, rolls in the grass with his daughter. Chloe smiled, her eyes shining. "You know what I learned from all this, Maya? That sometimes the greatest loves of our lives begin in the most unexpected moments. A stumble, a fall, an accident that changes everything. And that the most broken people can heal when they find someone willing to stay," Maya completed, squeezing her friend's hand. Across the garden, Julian lifted Aurora onto his shoulders as she pointed at the butterflies. He no longer felt any trace of the panic that had once dominated his life. There were no more tremors, no more fear, no more medication. There was only love. Love that healed, love that liberated, love that transformed. Mommy, Aurora shouted from a distance. Tell the story again of how you and Daddy met. Chloe laughed, cupping her hands around her mouth to shout back. It's a story about a very special stumble, my love. The best stumble in the world, Julian added, spinning with his daughter on his shoulders as she giggled. And so, in the stillness of that perfect morning, surrounded by flowers grown with technology and love, by the family they had built together and by the dreams they continued to realize, Chloe and Julian finally understood the deepest truth of all. That true love doesn't have to be perfect from the start. It just needs to be real, brave enough to face the fears, strong enough to overcome the wounds of the past, and patient enough to grow, one day at a time. And that sometimes, just sometimes, the happiest endings begin with the most unlikely beginnings. With a clumsy stumble in a conference room, with a spilled cup of coffee, with a moment of pure chance that turns into the most beautiful love story two people could ever write together. Hey, story lovers! What a journey, right? The story of Julian and Chloe is proof that the most unlikely encounters can heal the deepest wounds. We saw a man who lived isolated by trauma, a prisoner of his own fear, find his cure in the most unexpected touch. And a woman who, with her simplicity and courage, not only broke down the barriers of an enigmatic CEO, but also taught him how to feel and love again. A journey that showed us that true love doesn't judge, isn't prejudiced, and above all, has the power to rescue the soul. Now, tell us, what was the moment that made your heart beat faster? The instant Chloe fell into Julian's lap and accidentally changed everything? Her courage in touching his back in front of the entire board, breaking the biggest taboo in the company? Or the scene with the punch, when Julian cast fear aside and became the protector she deserved? Drop a comment below, we want to know. If this story of healing and improbable love moved you, please share it. Let's spread the message that no one is broken forever and that the right person can be our best medicine. And of course, don't forget to suggest themes for our next video. A big hug and see you next time, where we'll prove once again that true love, the kind that protects, respects, and heals, is the most transformative force in the universe.